Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Really good to be here. I'm hoping that everybody is able to hear me loud and clear before I start speaking. My topic today is modern data strategy to scale AI. Okay, and in the session today, I'll be touching upon state of data utilization across various industries. Are we really consuming data the way we really should? What are the facts? Why is it imperative for organizations to have a data strategy in place? And then once we decide that we need to create a strategy, how and exactly where do we start? And then I'll talk about data strategy paradigms and the framework, and then follow it up with an example of a data strategy that we created for our organization, and that can help you take a few aspects back from this presentation, and I'll show you what exactly we covered as we started chalking out our data strategy. And then towards the end, should there be any queries or questions, I'll be more than happy to sort of take them and answer them. So moving forward, we keep hearing this term, data is the new oil. But frankly, for me, it's slightly different from a perspective that oil, if you use it by nature of what it is, you cannot consume it again. But data is something that you could utilize it once, and then you can keep utilizing it again and again. So for me, it's more of a soil rather than oil, because you can leverage data again and again to decipher different patterns, behavior, and what have you. But when we look at different industries and across various different industry spectrums, we realize that even after the advances in data management functions and introduction of roles such as chief data officers, etc., we don't see industries using information really the way they should have. So if you look at the stats, for example, on an average, less than half of the any organization's structured data is leveraged in decision-making process. And if you look at the unstructured data, less than 1% of that is ever analyzed, if at all, right? So that's not a good news. And then if you look at employees of any organization, for example, 70% of the time, employees would have access to information that they should not be accessing. And if you look at information and data analysts, 80% of their time is spent in preparing data rather than understanding behavior, trends, patterns, to be able to leverage it for AI and analytics and any actionable insight. So that's not a good news for us. And then obviously there are data breaches which are common. There are rogue data sets propagating across the information management ecosystem. Companies' demand on data for technology capabilities is not easily sort of coped up with. So what essentially is missing, and what really we need to have, is a coherent and clear data strategy for organizing, governing, analyzing, and deploying information and organizations' information assets, and also leverage it for AI analytics and actionable insights, so companies and organizations can take actions in time. So it all starts with data strategy, but where do we start and how do we start? So I think where organizations usually go wrong is that they expect and they ask their IT teams to chalk out a data strategy for them. And I think what then happens is that technical teams, they focus more on the data storage aspects, the aspects of data governance, aspects of data integrity and data ownership. Now, not to undermine those considerations and dimensions, extremely important, but I think what they lack and what they fail to understand is that there has to be a business aspect of how can data help you execute your business strategy and fuel it to an extent that you could start leveraging data to bring value to the organization. Now, that can obviously be in the form of helping businesses make better decisions. It could be in the form of helping your operations be more efficient. And it could also be, to the next level whereas you leverage data to transform your business model, monetize information to get into more fee income and start changing the game completely, leveraging information. So that's extremely important. So for example, Fitbit is a very good example. Now, Fitbit wearables are heavily utilized by so many different consumers. And what Fitbit is now doing is that it's taking data from its wearables, aggregating it, and then providing it to different insurers and health industry to sort of monetize the data that they have from their wearables. And interestingly, even insurance firms, some of them, are incentivizing their consumers and clients, or whoever is trying to wear a Fitbit. So it's an example of data being monetized by a platform business, and then sort of changing the game for the business itself. So what do you want to do with data as an organization? Extremely important question to ask yourself, and then you should be very, very clear in terms of how can data essentially help you execute your strategy. Now, once that is done, there has to be discipline around how you gather information, both internal and external data. What do you do in situations when data isn't there that you require? There has to be a strategy in place. And last but not least, once you have the information, you have to convert it into artificial intelligence, analytics, and insights that can help you take action, so you can bring in value to the organization. And that's extremely, extremely important. So let's move forward. So offense versus defense. Now, Harvard Business Review had published a very, very interesting article on data strategy and different paradigms that exist in the context of data strategy. So offense versus defense paradigm essentially is that if you look at various different industries, some industries are heavily regulated while the others are not. And interestingly, what the review has come out with is that industries who are heavily regulated, likes of health industry or banks, for example, they spend more time, money, and effort in their data management efforts to comply with regulations, or to make sure that they do not incur cost, or they do cost cutting and prevent themselves from likes of fraud, etc. So that's where most of the investments in data are going towards. However, industries which are not regulated as such, like, for example, retail industry, they have the leverage and opportunity to spend more effort, time, and investments in a more offensive data strategy, which essentially means that you can leverage information to improve your top line and make more revenues for the organization. So I think the key is that as an organization, whichever industry you are, you have to chalk out a right balance between offense and defense. So while complying with regulation, extremely important, but at the same time, you should be able to leverage information for competitive advantage, better revenues as well. So that's extremely, extremely important. So let's move forward. So a data strategy framework is very, very important. So when you have to chalk out a strategy, there has to be a disciplined way of how do you go about the approach of chalking out a strategy. So a framework which we leveraged while creating our strategy was that we had strategy inputs in the form of internal expectations from our bank strategy, as well as internal stakeholders. And also we looked at external pressures from customers, from competition, from regulators. And then we took all those inputs, and then we assessed ourselves against various different dimensions of people, process, technology, data, and analytics. And we sort of came up with what is the current state looking like for us as an organization, and then what is the target state for us. So, where do we eventually want to see ourselves? And once the target state is deciphered, what is the roadmap that we need to have in place year on year to make sure that we slowly and gradually achieve what we are trying to achieve? So I'd like to sort of walk you all, across certain aspects of our data strategy as a case study to help you take away some of the things that you should be considering while you're creating your own data strategies for your respective organizations. So let's start with internal expectations. So when we started looking at internal expectations, the first and the foremost for us was our bank's strategy itself. And when, as a bank, we were aspiring to sort of bring in more lifestyle services to our customers, we realized that underpinning a lot of analytics, that is required to bring value in the entire journey that we create with our customers. And interestingly, when we started categorizing it in the context of offense versus defense, it was nice to see that there was a lot of offense nature of analytics and AI, which was needed by our platform to bring value to the customers that are going to be engaged on our platform. So that's where we started. And then we also figured out information metrics, requirements, KPIs, which as a bank we were never looking at before. But just because we were entering a platform business model, we had to sort of see that from an acquisition perspective, what kind of customers are joining our platform, how many of them are organic versus paid, what is the sources of traffic for our online channels, looking at competition, how easy is it for our customers to switch channels and go to our competition, how many customers are actually using us and other platform for similar services. Looking at engagement, are we onboarding new cohorts of customers who are easier for us to retain? What is it that we need to do to retain them better? How do we engage them more and more? And what is it that they like to do more on our platform? And how can we make that experience better? So all that insight and analytics from the platform itself became so important for us to start measuring, because unless and until we see where exactly we create value for our customers, we won't be able to take the right action. We were getting into a marketplace business model. So, things like our average inventory size, how fast does it take for anybody who orders anything from our platform to eventually get the goods, etc. So all those aspects were new to us as a bank, and we had to sort of look at, while we are getting into this business model, what exactly do we need from an information asset perspective? And we had to identify it upfront in our data strategy. So then what we also did was that we spoke to different executives, different departments within our organization, and we sort of gave them an opportunity to tell us about their pain points. What are their current data challenges? And, how is it that we can sort of enable them to reach the target state that they have in mind for their respective data related to their department. So what is the target state that they have in mind, and how can we sort of enable them to reach that target state? So we sort of spoke to different departments within the bank: risk, finance, operation, business, and what have you. And interestingly, when we looked at the feedback received from those departments and we put them in the spectrum of the dimensions of people, process, technology, data, and analytics, and we started looking at what's the maturity of our organization, how ready are we as a bank to be more on the offensive side of the strategy as opposed to the defensive side, which we've always been. Ever since financial crisis, every bank has been more on the defense side of the spectrum when it comes to data-related investments, as opposed to offense. So we are, as an industry, we still have a lot of catching up to do. So interestingly, it was nice to see that people were also thinking on the same lines, and from a perspective of where do they want to see themselves, we are more leaning towards the offense strategy, which was good news. And then we started looking at some of the external inputs as well. So customers, ever since COVID-19, I think every customer and in every industry, be it financial services or retailer or whatever, customers are expecting services to be delivered at the comfort of their home 24/7. So COVID has put a lot of pressure, not only on financial institutions, but I think generally across all industries, to make sure that platform business model is enabling customers with all the services that they need, and no different for the bank. So, customers are more digital savvy, they're more digital native, and they want to do things that they earlier used to do in the branches now on the platform itself. Looking at the competition, they're also mindful of what customers expect. So they're catching up much faster. So what is it that we need to do as a company to not only catch up with competition, but also what is it that we need to do to have a leapfrog, compared to our competition? So that's where how we leverage information becomes very, very important. And then regulations obviously cannot be missed. There's some regulation that we need to comply with, but then also there are a few which are just around the corner, like GDPR, for example. So how do we create discipline, governance within the information management within our institution to make sure that we are complying with the best practices and guidelines given to us by regulators. Extremely important perspectives, I think, must be considered in any data strategy which is chalked out for any organization. And we did the same. I'm not going to go through details of this slide, but essentially perspectives from customers, competition, regulator has to be then framed into this framework of people, process, technology, data, and analytics, and what exactly do you need to do as an organization to make sure that you are addressing all the aspects, and that's extremely important. So now we move towards current state assessment. How do we define target state for our bank? What exactly did we do? And then extremely important is the roadmap as to how do you phase out your initiatives to make sure that you start graduating yourself from the identified current state to the target state. So the process essentially begins with you need a yardstick to measure yourself, and we had to have a maturity model. So we adapted one from KPMG, which essentially helped us measure ourselves across the strategy dimensions of people, process, technology, data, and analytics, and see where exactly do we stand and how can we graduate to more advanced levels of maturity as we start investing in our data strategy. So in the initial analysis, we figured out that we were in the early stage graduating towards operational, because we had made some investments in data warehouse, and we were sort of trying to make sure that it's institutionalized more and more within the organization. But then there were areas in the advanced and the visionary side of the spectrum which we were lagging behind, and we had to sort of put in initiatives in place to see how we graduate ourselves towards that spectrum. People was a very, very important aspect. So if we look at the staff across the bank, we figured out that most of the staff in the bank has been with the bank since the inception of the bank itself, which meant that they were more accustomed to do things that we were doing for past 12 years. And not many of them had been exposed to cutting edge technologies, new ways of doing things, etc. So there was a clear gap in terms of what skill sets we require to not just capture the data, but also leverage it for adding value to the organization. Now, how do we do that? So what we realized is that data staff, information management staff was scattered across different departments within the bank and organically grow towards. So every department had its own data engineer trying to do data manipulations, transformations, essentially doing the same thing, for different departments again and again, different people doing the same thing on the same data. So we realize that there is essentially wisdom in bringing them together in a centralized function, whereby they can learn from each other's knowledge. One, plus there can also be governance around how they're aggregating information, and there's also accuracy, and eventually we reach a single source, whereby we're not calculating averages different way, different departments. So that was very, very important for us to realize how do we rationalize people and we bring them under the same umbrella. So that's one of the things that we said that we need to have in place. From a perspective of technology, we had everything that we needed from a capability standpoint, but we had gaps in skill set and we had gaps in processes. So, how did it hurt us? So essentially, if you look at the information management ecosystem, we had a lot of point-to-point integrations. We had a lot of extracts in the form of Excels and Excels after Excels, and proliferating right across the organization. Too many disparate data marts and silos, and every department producing the same number in 2 to 3 different ways, and none of that was reconciling. So it was a clear mess. But we said we need to set a target architecture for ourselves as an organization. It has to be a straight-through process. We don't want to be aggregating the same number again and again. So we're going to be extracting information in a way which is more transparent and is done once instead of doing it again and again. And then we create a single source of truth for both structured data as well as unstructured data. So we created a data lake as well as a data warehouse. And then obviously those repositories started feeding the other downstream application, including AI, advanced analytics, and other various different banking use cases. So this architecture and bringing discipline in the way we were doing things was extremely important for us. And that was the target state that we had kept for ourselves. And see, banks have been very good at sort of leveraging structured data, but very rarely banks leverage data which is received externally from social media, from web scraping, for web logs, etc., etc. But in our strategy, we were very clear that we would want access to external data uh, assets as well, so we could leverage them to sort of see what is the behavior of our customers on various different channels, as well as uh, on different channels of our partners as well, on the partner website, and see how exactly is our customer behaving, and then how can we leverage that to bring value to the customer. So that was also part of the thinking process. And we figured out exactly what roles we had to hire, what exactly are they going to be doing, their responsibilities, what skill set are we looking at, and what tools do we have to have in place to enable them to do their job better. So we sort of identified and also had a hiring plan in place. Similarly, from a process perspective, essentially the data requirements or data services or data related work was managed using SDLC, not the best way to do it. So we figured out that there was a need for us to be more agile, and we adapted data ops as a process, more agile from a data engineering perspective. And then we also adapted ML ops for AI, so make sure that we are more agile when it comes to delivering insights and actionable analysis, leveraging our information. So changing the process and the mindset for us was very, very important. And then having a roadmap, a clear roadmap, which can sort of help you understand how do you take off from the situation you are, and then small baby steps for you to sort of move towards the right targeted state for your maturity. What is it that you need to do across all strategy dimensions? So creating roadmap for us was very, very important. We figured out what is it that we need to do this year, followed by what is it that we need to do next year and beyond, to be able to reach advanced and visionary stages of our maturity model. So that roadmap was very, very important. And we presented it to the MEC, to the board, to secure investments, and sort of also bring business lines together so we could sequence some of the business analytics and AI initiatives, because you cannot, as an organization, you cannot do everything at the same time or now. So it's very, very important to sequence out your initiatives using the dimension of cost involved, priority, value to the organization. So there are different dimensions which come into the picture, which helps you sequence your data initiatives across the spectrum of your strategy. If your strategy is a 3-year strategy, then you can sort of spread your initiatives right across the strategy pattern. And then we took it through the right approval process to make sure that we engage the right teams, we get the right capex, we get the right sort of sponsorship, and we execute what we were trying to aspire. So very, very important. So this is how we crafted our strategy, and I'm hoping that there are takeaways from what I've just shown you and helps you go back and sort of improve your own data strategy if you have one in place. Or if you don't have one in place, it should give you some food for thought of how exactly you should be starting the process of strategy formulation, to make sure that you're not only able to use it for AI, but for making sure that you bring the right value for your organization. So that's it from my side, and I'm happy to take any questions should you have. Okay, so there's a question, and it says, how did you get buy-in from various business units? Very good question, first of all. Look, so the process for us was slightly simpler, because data strategy and sort of investments in data were driven right from the top. So we were lucky to have a board and management which were data savvy, and they realized that if they had to succeed in the business that they're in, it has to be data driven. So because it came from the top, it made our job easier, because we did not have to do a lot of education to different stakeholders, because bank, as in terms of maturity, realized that they had to sort of speed up their game in leveraging information. So in our case was slightly easier, but I can assume and understand that there are organizations, if they do not appreciate the fact that businesses are now becoming data-driven businesses, then making sure that you get the right level of sponsorship and investments can be a challenge, and is a longer journey to educate different levels of management to understand what you're trying to do, and then also buy into the thinking process. So luckily for us, it wasn't the case. Okay, so there's another question, and the question is, how easy was it to implement data ops, and what were the key challenges? So I think crafting a data ops process for us was not a challenge, but adapting it really was, because we were trying to do something new for the first time. So obviously we had to sort of not only bring people who had understanding of data ops from a practice perspective, but we also had to go through a training. And then training not only for data professionals, but also for the end business user, because you're changing the way they've been engaging before. So the culture change is where I think knowledge, training, and those peer-to-peer reviews and making business work through the data ops process time and again is very, very important. And you learn as you practice. So for us, it was walk the talk kind of a thing, where we started adapting it, and we learned in the process of adapting, and we corrected ourselves wherever we were going wrong. So it was more of a training plus also guidance for us from different experts to make sure that we are following it right. And I think any organization for adapting data ops is a culture change, and it requires the right amount of training, knowledge, and whatever investments that you need to make it. That's very, very important. So there's one more question. Do you have MI teams across different business units, or have you centralized analytics in one team? So we had MI teams across different business units, and organically, this is how it becomes situation in any organization, because businesses are hiring data skills as and when they need them, and then slowly and gradually you figure out that there's a huge amount of data plowing and data intensive work happening in every different department. So it was the case in our organization as well. But we went through the change of centralizing and bringing those teams together, making them sit together, and making sure that they're doing aggregations, integration, whatever they do, in a manner which is shareable, it's reconciled, it's the same, and also making sure that there is governance around how it's done. So, and also knowledge sharing. So we had to go through that process of bringing those people together under a particular department. We called it Center of Excellence for Information Management. And then, they became part of the team, and they started, sharing information, knowledge between the peers. And that was very, very important for us. So thank you all. I think the time is up, so I'll stop broadcasting, and I wish you all a very happy day going forward. Thank you so much.